Okay, so hello and welcome to today's Info2Go webinar. My name is Annie Gaines and I am the Continuing Education Consultant here at the Idaho Commission for Libraries, located in sunny Boise, Idaho. Our webinars and other continuing education opportunities are funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Everyone is muted and we encourage you to use the chat feature to ask questions and discuss with other attendees. As you exit the webinar, you will be prompted to complete an evaluation, and we always appreciate your honest feedback. Today's topic is collection development policies, and our presenter today is Deborah Caldwell-Stone, Director of the ALA Office for Intellectual Freedom. Deborah, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'm going to begin to share my slides as well here. And I do want to thank everyone for joining us on a summer morning. Time is short for everyone, and I'm so glad you joined us for this discussion of collection development policies and intellectual freedom. I hope you don't mind that I share a few words about the state of intellectual freedom in our libraries today as I begin my presentation. As you know, I'm sure it hasn't been a good year for many libraries and library workers fighting to serve their community's information needs on the front line in the battle over books. But if there's anything like good news, the good news is that librarians overall are deeply valued by their communities. In fact, this past spring, the ALA commissioned a new national poll of voters and parents conducted by Hart Research Associates and North Star Opinion Research. This survey was conducted on our behalf, and it sampled a large group of voters and parents nationwide from all kinds of political persuasions. And those participating in the survey say that they hold librarians in high regard. They have confidence in their local libraries to make good decisions about what books to include in their collections. And overall, the poll respondents agree that libraries in their communities do a good job of offering books that represent a variety of viewpoints. In fact, 9 out of 10 voters say that they have a favorable opinion of library workers who work in their local public libraries and those who work in their school libraries. And voters across the political spectrum say that public libraries and school libraries have an important role to play in their communities and schools. They say that they're confident in local public libraries' ability to make good decisions and think that libraries do a good job in representing a variety of viewpoints. In addition, majority of public school parents affirm that various types of books should be available in school libraries on an age-appropriate basis. Finally, 7 out of 10 voters oppose efforts to remove books from libraries, including majorities of voters across party lines. Now, these results are welcome news, especially after a banner year for censorship, during which there was an unprecedented and remarkable increase in the number of demands to remove books from the shelves of school and public libraries. When I say unprecedented and remarkable, I don't use those words lightly. I joined the staff of the Office for Intellectual Freedom in the year 2000, and I honestly cannot recall a time like the fall of 2021 when individuals, advocacy groups, and elected officials all appeared to call for the use of official government censorship as a means for limiting students and young people's access to books and reading materials. Now, in raw numbers, the Office for Intellectual Freedom tracked 729 challenges asking for the removal of books and other resources from libraries, schools, and universities. And these challenges targeted 1,597 individual book titles that ranged from picture book biographies of civil rights heroes to graphic novels recounting the coming of age stories of gay and transgender persons. These numbers represent the most attempts to ban books since we began tracking book challenges over 20 years ago. To place these numbers in context, remember that OIF tracked 377 challenges targeting 566 titles in 2019, which was the last year schools and libraries were fully open before the pandemic. Now, the books that are most frequently challenged in 2021 share a few common characteristics. First, nearly all the books challenged or banned in 2021 were books intended for use of K through 12 students or offered to K through 12 students as part of the school curriculum. Second, the overwhelming majority of books challenged and banned in 2021 were books that dealt with the lives and experiences of traditionally marginalized groups in the United States, ranging from All Boys Aren't Blue, a memoir of growing up Black and gay, to the absolutely true diary of a part-time Indian, Sherman Alexie's fictional memoir of growing up on the reservation, to Beyond Magenta, a nonfiction anthology collecting the stories of transgender teens. Now, as an advocate for intellectual freedom and academic freedom, the American Library Association has consistently pursued a comprehensive program of professional education, development of standards, and advocacy that supports a standard of practice that promotes and protects the freedom of inquiry in the library, while acknowledging the unique information needs of each community. Our primary means of accomplishing this goal has been the promotion of and adoption of written policies that draw on the law, professional research, and demonstrated best practices to guide the work of library professionals. Now, assuring the freedom to read in the library requires an ongoing commitment to implementing those policies, practices, and procedures that are consistently applied to the library's provision of books, information, and programs. Written policies make principles concrete. They encourage stability and continuity in the library's operations while reducing any ambiguity or confusion about the library's ongoing practices and procedures. They also inform the community about the library's mission and goals and how the library intends to achieve them. They also provide the community with the means to evaluate the library's performance and show that the library is willing to be held accountable for its decisions. The goal is to demonstrate to the public and to governing authorities that the acquisition of library books and resources is not a haphazard process or the result of a partisan or political agenda. Written policies are also useful in court should the library be sued, which is not a remote threat in a time when elected officials are proposing legislation to criminalize library service. Well-crafted written policies ensure that the library legally fulfills its mission of providing access to information for the members of its community, while also ensuring a safe and welcoming environment for the library users and the library staff. And well-constructed policies play an especially important role when a library is addressing a challenge or a controversy concerning the library's books, programming, or services. And written policies dispel some of the most noxious claims of the book banners, that the library's selection of materials is biased or arbitrary or reflects that political agenda that we hear so much about. Written policies can also be enormous support in doing outreach to the community. Now, a well-written policy complies with the law, not just statutes and regulations, but also the legal precedents that address the user's right to receive information in the library. It should address and prioritize the community's unique information needs and detail areas of special concern and special emphasis. It should be accessible to the public. That is, it should be written in plain language so that it can be understood by most adults living in the community, and written so as to be objective and non-discriminatory in its application. It should also provide staff with sufficient guidance to apply policies consistently and in the same way for all library users. And also, it should provide for due process. That is, provide for fair notice, transparency, all about the library's policies and procedures. It should establish practices that allow for deliberation and public input into decision-making about the library's operations, and allow an opportunity to revisit or review decisions that a person believes is incorrect, unfair, or a misrepresentation of law or library policy. Now, while the governing bodies of libraries can adopt a detailed range of policies concerning the library's operations, there are 5 policies essential for the defense of the library user's right to receive information and the library's right to serve the information needs of its community. These include the collection development policy, the reconsideration of materials policy, which is often incorporated into the collection development policy, an internet use policy, a user behavior policy, and that's the policy that establishes rules for the use of the library. And there should be at least 2 different privacy policies, one policy for addressing data privacy and another one for responding to requests for user records from third parties outside the library. But our topic today is the collection development policy. The blueprint, which is a tool for building the library's resources and also a means for assuring the library users' freedom to read. There are several essential elements of a collection development policy, and I'll address each of them today. Now, first is the mission statement. This, each type of library, whether it's a public library, school library, or academic library, should have a central guiding mission statement that defines the library's purpose. The mission statement describes the library's philosophy of library service in light of the library's core values and describes who the library serves as a means of guiding the library's service to its community. For example, a library's mission may say that it works to provide members of the community with the information needed to make informed decisions and to become full participants in society. The next element is a statement of the selection policy's objectives and goals. This portion of the collection development policy outlines the library's priorities for its collection in light of the library's mission statement, such as meeting the cultural, informational, educational, and recreational needs of the library's community. This portion of the collection development policy can also tie the policy's statement of objectives to a particular strategic plan or particular goals of the library, such as support for lifelong learning, support for homeschooling, or assuring full and equitable access to library resources for those experiencing social and economic inequality. Another essential element of a collection development policy is the intellectual freedom statement. This statement identifies intellectual freedom, the freedom to read, the freedom to access ideas and opinions across the political spectrum and social spectrum as an underlying philosophy of the library's collection development policy, and it establishes a commitment to freedom of access to information. Many libraries incorporate statements of professional values tied to the First Amendment and the freedom of thought and expression as appendices to the collection development policy. For example, the policy can state that the library provides an impartial environment in which individuals can explore the universe of ideas and information spanning the spectrum of knowledge and opinions, and affirm the Library Bill of Rights and the freedom to read as policy statements in support of acquiring and managing its collection, and then append the Library Bill of Rights and the freedom to read statement as policy provisions for the library. The next element is responsibility for selection. And this portion of the policy outlines who participates in the development of the library's collections. This, of course, is based on the size and complexity of the library, whether it's a small one-room library in the country or a complex, diverse urban library with many branches. So it can be one or many people who contribute to the selection process by recommending resources for the library. But the important thing, in all cases, the policy should make it clear that final decision-making lies with the library's director or other library professionals on the library staff. Now, the criteria listed in the policy, I used objective standards used to select the materials, and this can be general or specific and guide the library staff in their purchase of books and resources for the collection. Some general criteria could be relevance to community needs, suitability of format for library use, the needs of a specific audience or particular community interests. More specific criteria could look at authority, currency, and representation of diverse points of view, identify particular genres that are of interest to your community, or highlight trends that are current in society. And this portion of the policy should also identify selection aids and resources, things like book list, library journal, publishers weekly as sources of reviews, and identify staff and user recommendations as another basis for selecting books. Now, procedures, this may actually be part of a procedure manual. This is always a choice when devising written policies, to have a separate procedures manual that accompanies the written policy. But procedures establish consistent practices for acquiring resources and describes the steps in acquiring library resources from the initial screening to the time of final selection. Again, these procedures will depend on the library size, staff, and organization. It could be a single page, and it could run to multiple pages or multiple sections, depending on the library's needs and the complexity of the services it offers. It could have a separate section for addressing electronic resources and their acquisition, for example. Now, collection development policy should always reserve a space for addressing special concerns. This could include the handling of gifts and donations, or the library's commitment to addressing controversial issues or topics in its collection, or the existence of any special collections or archives that are housed by the libraries. For gifts or donations, for example, the policy should state that any donated materials must meet the library selection criteria and go through the acquisitions process before any resource or book can be added to the collection, even if the gift is well intended. The controversial topics statement can explain that materials addressing controversial topics will be included in the collection when they meet the library selection criteria. And it should note that the fact that it is a controversial topic does not cause an item to be automatically included or excluded from the library's collections, and that the representation of an idea, opinion, or school of thought within the library's collection does not in any fashion constitute an endorsement by the library, its staff, or its trustees. You can see that the controversial statement topic statement can be an important resource in supporting access to information and intellectual freedom in the community. Things like special collections and archives, of course, should always be noted in the policy. Things like, for example, I'm aware of a library in Alaska that has, for a public library, has an enormous collection that addresses the use of explosives for the purpose of serving its community, which is primarily based in mining in that community. Now, collection maintenance addresses the library's criteria for regular periodic review of its collections, for looking at nonfiction, for example, for accuracy, currency, and relevance to its topic. It can also look at other criteria like usage, the diversity of the materials in the library, or the gaps in the library's coverage of a particular subject or genre. The policy should also include the standards used for weeding materials from the collections. And these weeding standards should be based on objective standards, such as age, currency, use. It should not be used as a tool for removing controversial materials. That's the role of the reconsideration policy, which we'll discuss later. But a written statement that weeding is not to be considered a process for removing controversial materials could be included in your policy. Policy maintenance is the portion of the policy that should establish a regular timeline and procedure for periodic review of the collection development policy, and really all of the library's policies, whether it addresses user behavior, meeting rooms, other issues that arise for the library. They should make sure that the policy reflects current professional standards and any changes in technology, law, or regulation that has cropped up since the policy was last written. But another important thing about policy maintenance, the written policy should assure that policy revisions do not take place while a former challenge to a library resource is under reconsideration. Which now brings us to the essential policy for any collection, the reconsideration policy and the accompanying procedures that go with the reconsideration policy. Now, these are the guidelines and procedures established by the governing body of the library that guide the library staff in addressing concerns about library resources. It's all but certain, and I'm sure many of you already know, community members will voice concerns or submit formal complaints to the library about the books and other resources that the library collects for their use. And libraries need to have a policy and procedure in place to handle these objections. This policy should establish the framework for registering a complaint that provides for a review process that includes appropriate actions while defending the principles of freedom of information and the right of patrons to access materials in the library. It should also address the professional responsibility and the integrity of the libraries involved in the selection process and defend their professional expertise. Now, the reconsideration policy is a core intellectual freedom tool for any institution, but especially for public libraries and school libraries that are subject to external pressure from elected officials, governing bodies, and members of the public who are eager to censor particular books and resources. By incorporating written procedures for managing concerns about resources into the reconsideration policy, and requiring that that policy and its accompanying procedures be followed regardless of who brings a challenge to a resource, the library can prevent or forestall arbitrary or precipitous decisions to remove or restrict a book and try to assure due process by providing an equal voice to all involved in the reconsideration process. And that includes all members of the community. And assuring that the resource itself is evaluated as a whole and not on the basis of a single image or a single paragraph, but looking at the work as a totality and its usefulness as an information resource for members of the community. Now, as I mentioned before, the policy should stress that no materials will be removed without following the full reconsideration policy, and no materials should be removed upon the authority of a single staff member or administrator, elected official, or library trustee. It should also provide a process and a roadmap for the library staff, and also the trustees and its volunteers as well, for addressing concerns about the library's books and resources, because you never know. Someone will just walk up to someone shelving books as a volunteer page, go to the circulation desk, or step into the director's office to raise either a verbal complaint or to demand formal reconsideration. But everyone who works for the library, with the library, governs the library, should understand both the collection development policy and the reconsideration policy and be able to talk about it and understand and know the procedure for handling complaints and making sure that the complaint or concern is handled appropriately. This can range from a volunteer saying, I'm sorry that you've had a bad experience here. Let me introduce you to the library director who can handle your concern, to the library director or a library trustee who will advise the individual on how the library collects materials, why a particular resource might be in the collection, the library's policy on controversial materials, and offering the opportunity to file a formal written complaint should the person wish to pursue it after that conversation. Now, the gritty details of writing collection development policies and reconsideration policies is really a topic for a much longer webinar, or really a series of webinars. You can get into the details, the weeds about law and procedure and what's best practice for your particular library or your particular community. But there are many books, recordings, and articles that offer guidance on drafting and implementing selection and reconsideration policies. And probably the best we have available right now is a wonderful free and online resource for policy development called the Selection and Reconsideration Policy Toolkit that's available through the ALA website. And you'll see that the URL is here on the slide, and I'll make these slides available after the presentation. It's written by working librarians who have been in school libraries, public libraries, and academic libraries. And it provides a great roadmap for evaluating any existing policies, as well as creating a policy when there isn't one in place. Also, if it's available to you, the 10th edition of the Intellectual Freedom Manual provides detailed guidance for drafting and improving library policy across the spectrum of policies. This includes collection development and requests for reconsideration. The manual also includes detailed essays on the First Amendment and its application to library policy. These are written by Teresa Camara, who is legal counsel for the Freedom to Read Foundation, who has 30 years experience working on First Amendment issues in courts of law. These essays supply much more detail on the legal principles applicable to the library service, library users' rights, and the responsibilities of the library in supplying access to information, and their responsibilities in responding to requests for reconsideration and protecting the rights of the library user. And finally, I recommend Sandra Nelson and June Garcia's excellent resource entitled Creating Policies for Results, From Chaos to Clarity. Now, this is not specific to intellectual freedom or collection development, but it does offer detailed and thoughtful guidance on the process of developing all kinds of library policy. It ranges from a discussion of how to identify the need for policy to the process of gaining approval and buy-in from your community and from your board. You may need to find it from a library, use interlibrary loan. It was published by the Public Library Association in 2003, but it still exists, and I've never seen a better guide to creating policy as a whole, and I strongly recommend it to you. Now, I want to state that we recognize that the current campaign to censor a broad swath of reading materials in school and libraries represents a unique inflection point. As a result, ALA has launched a new public-facing national advocacy campaign called Unite Against Book Bans to harness the energy of that large majority of Americans that oppose book bans and help them use their voice in the public arena to stop the efforts to censor books. The campaign does draw on the poll findings I talked about earlier, based on the polling conducted on behalf of the ALA that found that large majorities of voters oppose efforts to have books removed from local libraries. And the campaign builds on these findings, and it's focused on empowering individuals and local groups who support libraries and free access to information, help them stand together in the fight against censorship, and to help them call on those in a position of power to protect the rights of everyone to access a variety of books in libraries and in schools and elsewhere. Now, the goal of the campaign will be to ask policymakers to reject efforts to ban books and to allow individuals, parents, to make their own decisions about what they can read and believe and what their children can read and believe. We recognize that parents and guardians have the right and the responsibility to make decisions about what reading materials are suitable for their own children, but we also stand firm in our belief that no one group or individual should make rules restricting what other people read or to make decisions for other families about what reading materials are available in their public institutions. Now, we're working with national partners to amplify these messages, including publishers, authors, and those involved in education, teachers of English, and others who are engaged in the act of promoting the right to read in our country. We want to support state and local efforts to resist censorship when there are demands to censor books, and prevent those efforts to limit educational opportunities for all. I encourage you to visit the website for Unite Against Book Bans at uniteagainstbookbans.org, all one word, if you haven't already, to learn more and to consider whether you might encourage members of your community to join our efforts to fight book censorship and to use the toolkit that's available there to empower themselves to speak out and to defend the freedom to read. Now, I want to conclude with one observation. Intellectual freedom is, after all, a practice based on democratic values and a respect for the rights of each individual. And in this time when these values and rights are being challenged daily, we must both celebrate and defend the right to read. And it falls to you as library workers, as information professionals, as educators, to translate the core values of the profession into meaningful actions that establish a culture of intellectual freedom in your institutions and in your community. To do this requires that the practice of intellectual freedom in your library go beyond the protection of the right to receive information to embrace individual human rights, to adopt policies and procedures that acknowledge and respect the inherent autonomy and dignity of each human being and their right to think independently, to form their own ideas and opinions, and to make their own choices about what to read. And then there needs to be both a personal and institutional commitment to eliminating any barriers that prevent marginalized or underserved members of your community from benefiting from the library's resources. This work includes the development of a collection that represents the full diversity of people and ideas in society. And there should be a commitment for standing up for intellectual freedom by resisting censorship in all its forms, not just resisting official censorship imposed by a government official, a state legislature, or a misguided board member, but also resisting the soft and silent censorship that can result from a fear of controversy or the belief that the books and resources available to a community should only reflect a particular person's set of values. Now, I do want to thank you for having me here today and spending some time with me. Wanted to highlight how you can reach out to our office to find help and to report censorship. Both of these things are important. We are the original censorship hotline. Anyone can contact OIF. You don't have to be an ALA member. And when you reach out to us using the censorship report forms, and the link is there, we'll come back and we'll see what we can do to assist you if you're dealing with a challenge in your library or in your community. Also, we'll answer questions about policy development. I frequently consult with libraries who are working on their policies. And note that there are other organizations as well that can be sources of support. But I do want to emphasize on that reporting censorship is important. This provides data that underlies our reporting on the most challenged books and helps us identify the need for new resources. And with that, I'll conclude and turn it back over to Annie. I'll be happy to take all your questions, whether it's on collection development policies, other intellectual freedom issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deborah. That was such a great wealth of information, all packed into a good talk. And like you said, we could have a series of webinars on this topic and still not quite capture everything. But I think you did a really good job. So folks in the audience, now is your opportunity. If you have any questions for Deborah Caldwell-Stone while she's here, we would love to ask her. And you're located in Chicago, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Has it been exceedingly hot there as it has been here in Boise?
Oddly enough, we've had a very moderate summer. It's been very cool for August for us. Usually we're in the 90s and we've been hovering around 80. I know that means other places are sweltering, and that probably includes portions of Idaho. And I'm sorry for that, but we're enjoying a nice summer here.
Yeah, that sounds delightful.
Yeah. I'm often in your neck of the woods. I have family who own a ranch in eastern Washington state on the Columbia River. So I'm often traveling through or visiting parts of Idaho when I'm visiting family there. So I always enjoy visiting your state and traveling there. So and so anyhow, but are there any? I haven't looked at chat.
I haven't seen any questions come in. I guess if you had one piece of advice for folks that are kind of going through it right now, what would that be?
I would say seek support. Don't go it alone. It's always easier to address a challenge, even if when you know that you have someone to listen to bounce ideas off of, to talk about strategy, what works, what doesn't work. So don't go it alone. Reach out for help, whether it's our office, the Idaho Library Association, or other organizations that provide assistance with challenges. The other is to prepare in advance to deal with the challenge. I mean, so much of it is being proactive. You have if you don't have a collection development policy, get one on the books, and acquaint your community with it. Reach out to your elected officials, reach out to community groups. Claims that library selection policies are arbitrary or politically oriented won't find a lot of traction if you've already talked to your Rotary or church group or met with your city council or your county commissioners to share the collection development policy, explain what went into developing it, and what the philosophy of library service is, which is nonpartisan and oriented toward providing a range of ideas and opinions for the benefit of the community. When you develop that relationship of trust, claims about what the library does or doesn't do won't find traction. They'll rely on the library's professional staff and their understanding that you've already provided to them about how the library actually works, so that that will help reduce or eliminate some of the controversies we've seen take place in the community.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing that the chat feature is not working. So if you have questions in the audience, please raise your hand and then I will unmute you and you can verbally state your question. Sorry about that technological issue there.
It happens.
But I think talking about, Rotary, Sir Optimist, any of those local community-based organizations are a really great place to go when this starts to happen, to get that community support. I
Yeah.
think that's right on.
And building a friends, if you haven't yet, building a friends group to support the library, it can start simply with, bake sales to raise funds for a special resource. But you do want to build a community of support for the library that is focused on the library and can be a source of volunteers, advocates, who can do other outreach for the library as well. And the thing that I did not touch on that is also an issue is First Amendment issues, the law. And actually, if individuals are looking for professional development credits, I strongly recommend a course that's being offered by Teresa Camara, who's general counsel for the Freedom to Read Foundation. She'll be teaching a 4-week course on the application of the First Amendment to library, and she'll be going in detail through all the legal precedents and laws that apply to public library service, particularly meeting room policies, minors' rights, the right to access the library physically, as well as the right to access the library's collections and make use of it. And that's available through ALA's continuing education department, and it's offering credit for those who need CP. I don't know what your acronym is for credits there, but it offers continuing education credits that can be used, and a certificate will be issued for those who complete the course. And it's a great resource for those who want a better understanding of the law and policy and government policies that affect information access. And certainly I'd be happy to return to talk about those topics as well.
That would be great. I found a link to that course that I'm going to put in the chat. Hopefully people can see the chat. It's just that you can't interact with the chat. And I have a question, so I'm going to allow Dina to talk.
Okay, great.
Okay,
Hi,
Dina.
Cool. Thanks, Annie. And thank you, Deborah, for a great presentation. And your last point kind of gets to my question, and that is we're kind of seeing some confusion, discussion about how there are abortion-related laws that are taking place differently in states, and a library being able to share information, and kind of the intersection of those two things, and the legal exposure of staff working in libraries, and how that potentially relates to some of these laws. And totally okay if you need to speak more generally about that question, because I know it's a developing topic, but it's something that is kind of newly on my radar.
I will tell you that we are looking into this, and in fact, I am working. We're working on a guidance for libraries. The executive board of ALA felt it needed to release a statement, and Annie, I think you can provide a link to the statement that was released by the ALA executive board. That statement was based on legal analysis conducted by Teresa Camara and myself on the issue. I'm a licensed attorney as well. But the important thing to remember that laws that restrict or ban abortion as a medical procedure, or that threaten to hold that, I mean, what we're actually seeing is laws that don't actually create a crime of aiding and abetting abortion, but rather create a scheme where private individuals can win a bounty for bringing a lawsuit in civil court. And that's the most direct threat we've observed. That's the provision that was written into the Texas law, SB 8. But we're also seeing proposals for model state legislation coming out of a number of advocacy groups like the National Right to Life Committee that would make aiding and abetting a kind of a crime. But what you need to understand about aiding and abetting as a crime, and trying to define provision of information with that, is that there has to be a specific intent to actually aid an actual individual seeking an abortion that's illegal in your state. Providing access to books, providing access to the internet where someone might discover information about abortion or reproductive health is not aiding and abetting. There's no intent to aid a particular person. And if you actually provide information, accurate information about, say, what states have not criminalized abortion, again, that's factual information, that's not aiding and abetting. This is a little more complex than I'm making it. You're right that I'm simplifying it here, but we're fairly confident that libraries should not hesitate to provide access, simply providing access to books, electronic resources, research databases that contain information about abortion that the library user is free to consult on their own. Accessing information in the library is in fact a First Amendment protected activity. That's a detail that Teresa goes into in her CE course and is part of her written materials in the Intellectual Freedom Manual. But there's well-established court precedent for protecting access to libraries and access to the materials they provide. Information about abortion is still constitutionally protected in the United States, and I suspect a challenge would be mounted to any effort to suppress that information by the government under the First Amendment. But also be assured that if this becomes an issue in your community or in your library, you can reach out immediately, and the Freedom to Read Foundation, the American Library Association, and the Merit Fund are all ready to provide assistance in those cases, offering varying sources of support. I will say that we have assisted libraries who have faced claims that they have acted criminally in providing access to resources dealing with gender identity and sexual orientation or sex ed materials. All of those have failed. Uniformly, even though criminal complaints were filed in those cases, it was found that simply providing access to information that's constitutionally protected is not a crime, and that the library did not violate any laws in doing that. And I think it's the same thing with abortion information. I understand that we're going to be creating, in addition to the statement that was released by the executive board, we're preparing FAQs for libraries, library staff, library trustees to use in addressing this issue that draw on the legal principles and also talk about how to provide the ability to browse for each, private browsing in the library that uphold confidentiality statutes in each state. So anyhow, I'll finish there. Was there anything I missed or any other questions?
No, that was awesome. Thank you. And I'm reassured to hear that it is on y'all's radar. I wouldn't expect any less. And I look forward to hearing more from your office on that matter.
We anticipate having the guidance out in the next week or two. So
were there any final questions? Like I mentioned, just raise your hand in Zoom and then we can unmute you. Well, not seeing any final questions, it has been really wonderful to have you here with us, Deborah. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. This has been really informative and reassuring, which is kind of what I hoped for. So thank you so much for coming today. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Sorry about the chat issue, but hopefully that'll work next time. And I'm going to stop the recording now.